Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! In the bustling offices of Wellington and Forbes Marketing, a unique tradition had unfolded, a fantasy football league, where the workforce competed with an eagerness that mirrored their professional passion. Each year, as autumn's crisp breeze invited winter, the league's intensity heightened. Yet this third season held a peculiar twist that no one, especially Miguel, saw coming. Miguel Reyes, a skilled graphic designer whose precision was legendary, soon discovered a blind spot in his talents, an inability to forecast football outcomes. This lack of foresight led him to the bottom of the league. An email from his manager, Mr. Wellington, broke the news, revealing that this season's loser faced a unique forfeit. Stunned, Miguel scrutinized the email. He could quit the league. He could even claim some moral objection. But the truth was, the agency had been good to him. The pay was excellent, the hours reasonable, and he genuinely liked his colleagues. And it was just one evening. "Fine," he muttered, typing a quick response. "But I draw the line at anything inappropriate." The reply came almost instantly. "Don't worry. Cynthia is excited to help. She'll meet you tomorrow after work." Cynthia, Dennis's wife, was a fashion consultant known for her impeccable taste. Miguel wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. The following evening, Miguel found himself sitting awkwardly in Cynthia's home office, surrounded by makeup, clothing, and what appeared to be several wigs on stands. "Dennis told me about the forfeit," she said, with a warm smile. In her early 40s, Cynthia exuded confidence and kindness. "I promise I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm thinking something elegant, tasteful, something that would be appropriate for a professional woman at an office function." Miguel relaxed a little. "I appreciate that. I was worried that they'd put you in some ridiculous costume. Not on my watch." Cynthia assessed him thoughtfully. "You've got good bone structure. Slender build. We can work with this." For the next 2 hours, Cynthia showed him various outfit options, explaining the fundamentals of women's professional attire. Miguel found himself oddly engaged in the process, listening intently as she discussed the importance of proper fit and complementary colors. "I think this one," Cynthia said finally, holding up a floral wrap dress with a pattern of soft peach and green tones. "It's feminine without being over the top, and the wrap style is forgiving for different body types." Miguel nodded, surprised at his own interest. "It's actually quite nice." "Now for the wig," Cynthia continued, bringing over a soft, shoulder-length style in a natural-looking honey blonde shade. "I thought something that complements your skin tone but isn't too dramatic." The shoes were nude court heels. Not too high, you need to be able to walk properly. And Cynthia promised to help with makeup the day of the party. "Do you have a name you'd like to use?" she asked as Miguel prepared to leave. The question caught him off guard. "I hadn't thought about it." "Well, you should. It helps with the presentation, makes it feel more complete." That night, Miguel lay awake, thinking about names. For some reason, it felt important to choose the right one. Not something jokey or stereotypical, but something that could be his if... The thought trailed off, leaving an unsettling feeling in its wake. If what? This was a forfeit, a one-time thing, nothing more. Yet when the name Serafina popped into his head, a name he'd always found beautiful, it felt strangely right. The day of the party arrived. Miguel had taken the entire day off, partly due to nervousness, and partly because Cynthia had insisted he needed time to prepare properly. She arrived at his apartment mid-afternoon, carrying several bags and her professional makeup kit. "I've brought everything we'll need," she said, setting up in his bathroom.
"How are you feeling?"
"Nervous," Miguel admitted.
"I keep telling myself it's just one evening."
Cynthia gave him a thoughtful look. "Sometimes one evening can change everything," she said, enigmatically. "Now, let's get started." The transformation was more involved than Miguel had anticipated. First came the foundation garments, then the careful application of makeup, foundation, contouring, eye makeup, and lips. Cynthia worked meticulously, explaining each step. "The key is enhancement, not masking," she said as she blended foundation along his jawline. "We're working with what you already have." When it came time for the wig, Cynthia showed him how to put it on properly, adjusting it until the blonde locks fell naturally around his face. "Now the dress," she said, helping him step into the floral wrap dress and securing it properly. "And finally, the shoes." Standing in the heels required a few minutes of practice, but Miguel found his balance surprisingly quickly. "Look at yourself," Cynthia said softly, guiding him to the full-length mirror in his bedroom. The person staring back at Miguel was beautiful, not in a garish or costume-like way, but in a soft, elegant manner that took his breath away. The floral dress draped perfectly across his frame, the nude heels elongated his legs, and the honey blonde wig framed his face in a way that seemed to have been designed specifically for him. The makeup was subtle enough to look natural, but skillful enough to transform. "What do you think?" Cynthia asked after a long silence. Miguel struggled to find words. "Is it strange that I like it?" "Not at all," Cynthia replied with a gentle smile. "Many people find aspects of gender presentation enjoyable when given the chance to explore. So, who am I looking at? Did you choose a name?"
"Serafina,"
Miguel said, without hesitation. The name felt right on his lips, as if it had been waiting to be spoken. "Beautiful," Cynthia nodded approvingly. "Serafina, it is." The ride to the office party was quiet. Cynthia had offered to drive, sensing Serafina's, nervousness. They'd agreed that Cynthia would introduce Serafina to everyone, helping ease the initial awkwardness. "Remember to take small steps in those heels," Cynthia advised as they pulled into the parking lot. "And hold your head high. Confidence is key." The Wellington and Forbes quarterly party was being held in the company's renovated warehouse space, now transformed with twinkling lights and elegant table settings. As Serafina walked in beside Cynthia, conversations paused briefly before resuming with curious glances and whispers. Dennis approached immediately, champagne flute in hand.
"Well, I must say, Cynthia has outdone herself," he said, visibly impressed. "You look entirely professional and appropriate, which honestly exceeds my expectations."
"Thank you, I think," Serafina replied, surprised at how naturally she'd adopted a slightly softer tone. "May I introduce my colleague, Serafina?" Cynthia said smoothly to a group of people nearby, most of whom Serafina recognized as members of the marketing team. The evening progressed with surprising ease. After the initial stares and a few good-natured jokes about the Fantasy Football League forfeit, people seemed to accept Serafina's presence. Several colleagues complimented her dress, and the office receptionist even asked where she'd gotten her shoes. What was most unexpected, however, was how Serafina felt. There was none of the embarrassment Miguel had anticipated. Instead, there was a strange sense of rightness. The way the dress moved when she walked, the soft weight of the blonde hair against her neck,
the gentle click of heels on the floor. All of it felt comfortable in a way that defied explanation. "How are you holding up?" Cynthia asked, finding her by the drinks table an hour into the party. "Surprisingly well," Serafina admitted. "It's actually nice." Cynthia studied her face. "You seem different. More relaxed than I've ever seen Miguel at these functions." The observation struck a chord. It was true. Miguel had always felt awkward at office parties, standing stiffly in the corner, counting the minutes until it was acceptable to leave. Serafina, however, had been moving through the room with ease, engaging in conversations, even laughing. "I feel different," she acknowledged softly. As the evening continued, Serafina found herself in conversation with Rachel from accounting, a woman she'd barely spoken to before, despite working in the same building for 2 years. "I have to say," Rachel remarked, "you seem so natural. If I didn't know, I would never have guessed this wasn't, well, you." The comment lingered in Serafina's mind even after the party wound down, and Cynthia drove her home. Standing in her apartment, facing the mirror again, but this time alone, Serafina considered Rachel's words. What if this was her? What if the discomfort, the perpetual sense of not quite fitting in that had followed Miguel throughout his life, had nothing to do with social awkwardness and everything to do with something much more fundamental? The revelation didn't crash like a wave, but settled gently like snow, almost imperceptible until it had transformed the entire landscape. Serafina touched the soft fabric of the dress, ran her fingers through the blonde wig, and felt a sense of peace that had eluded Miguel for 32 years. The forfeit had been meant as a light-hearted punishment for losing a fantasy football league. Instead, it had turned into something far more significant, a catalyst for recognition, for truth. 3 days passed. The wig remained on its stand in Miguel's bedroom, the dress hanging in his closet. He'd returned the shoes to Cynthia, but hadn't been able to bring himself to part with the other items. Each morning, he looked at them before getting dressed in his usual attire, button-down shirts and slacks that suddenly felt like a costume. On the 4th day, he called Cynthia. "I need to talk to someone," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "And I think you might understand." They met at a quiet cafe far from the office. Cynthia listened without interruption as Miguel described the feelings that had surfaced during and after the party, the sense of rightness, the comfort in Serafina's skin that Miguel had never experienced. "I think—" He paused, gathering courage. "I think Serafina might be who I really am. I think I might be transgender." Cynthia reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I had a feeling," she said gently. "The way you transformed wasn't just physical. There was a peace about you, a naturalness that was beautiful to witness." Tears welled in Miguel's eyes. "I'm terrified. I'm 32 years old. How could I not have known this about myself until now?" "Many people don't realize until later in life," Cynthia assured him. "Some people have these feelings pushed down so deep, they need something, a catalyst, to bring them to the surface. For you, it was seeing yourself as Serafina for the first time." "What do I do now?" The question encompassed so much: practical steps, social implications, professional concerns. "One step at a time," Cynthia advised. "There are resources, communities, professionals who can help guide you. But remember, this is your journey. You set the pace." The following weeks were a whirlwind of research, soul-searching, and small steps forward. Miguel found a therapist specializing in gender identity, who helped him navigate his feelings and understand that his experience, while unique in its details, followed patterns familiar to many transgender individuals. Sometimes it takes a specific event to crack open the shell we've built around ourselves, Dr. Martinez explained during their third session. Your situation with the office party provided that moment of clarity, but the feelings have likely been there beneath the surface for much longer. Miguel nodded, remembering childhood moments that suddenly made more sense. The discomfort with certain masculine expectations, the inexplicable envy when observing girls and women, the persistent feeling of playing a role rather than living authentically. 2 months after the office party, Miguel made the decision to begin living as Serafina outside of therapy sessions. The first step was a private shopping trip with Cynthia, who had become not just a supporter, but a true friend. Professional attire first, Cynthia suggested as they walked through the department store. Things you can wear to work when you're ready for that step. Serafina ran her hand over a silk blouse in deep blue. When I think about going to work as myself, I feel both excited and terrified. That's understandable, Cynthia said. But remember how everyone responded at the party. There was initial surprise, but then acceptance. That was different. They thought it was temporary, a joke. Perhaps, but it also showed that you work with decent people who treated you with respect, even when they thought you were just fulfilling a forfeit. Give them a chance to support the real you. The conversation with Dennis was scheduled for a Monday morning. Serafina had rehearsed what she would say, but sitting across from her manager in his office, the carefully planned words evaporated. Dennis, I need to share something important, she began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was dressed as Miguel for what she hoped would be the last time, in a navy button-down and gray slacks that felt increasingly foreign to her true self. The party a few months ago, when I came as Serafina, it wasn't just a forfeit for me. It was an awakening. Dennis leaned forward, his expression open but unreadable. I've been seeing a therapist, and I've come to understand that I'm transgender. Serafina is who I truly am. I'd like to begin the process of transitioning at work. There was a moment of silence that felt eternal. Then Dennis nodded slowly. Thank you for trusting me with this, he said. What can I do to support you? The relief was so intense that Serafina felt lightheaded. I'd like to start presenting as female at work. I'll need to update my email, nameplate, and eventually official documents. And I'd appreciate your help in communicating this to the team. Consider it done, Dennis assured her. Wellington and Forbes has a strong non-discrimination policy. And frankly, the fact that you're one of our most talented designers is all that matters to me. Serafina or Miguel, you're an asset to this company. The transition at work was handled with sensitivity and professionalism. Dennis sent out a company-wide email the day before Serafina's first day, explaining the situation briefly and requesting respect and support from all colleagues. HR provided informational resources and made it clear that any disrespectful behavior would not be tolerated. On her first morning as Serafina at Wellington and Forbes, she chose to wear the original floral wrap dress in peach and green, a deliberate callback to the party, a bridge between the catalyst and the new reality. Her honey blonde hair, now her own growing out rather than a wig, though supplemented with subtle extensions for length, was styled simply but elegantly, and her makeup was professional and understated. Standing in the elevator, watching the numbers climb, Serafina felt a flutter of anxiety, but also a profound sense of finally moving toward herself rather than away. The doors opened, and she stepped onto the office floor.
Rachel from accounting was the first to greet her. "Good morning, Serafina," she said warmly, as if they'd been addressing each other this way for years. "That dress looks even better on you now than it did at the party." Throughout the day, colleagues approached with varying degrees of curiosity and support. There were awkward moments, a few instances of incorrect pronouns quickly corrected, some conversations that fell silent when she entered the room, but overwhelmingly, the response was positive. By the end of the week, Serafina had settled into a new normal. Her desk now displayed a nameplate reading Serafina Reyes, Senior Graphic Designer, and she had begun the lengthy process of legally changing her name and gender markers on official documents. The months that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. Serafina connected with other transgender individuals through support groups, finding comfort in shared experiences and guidance from those further along in their journeys. She began hormone therapy under medical supervision, experiencing gradual physical changes that aligned her body more closely with her true gender. Not all reactions were positive. Her parents struggled with the news, requesting time to process this unexpected development in their child's life. A few longtime acquaintances drifted away, uncomfortable with the change. But for each loss, there seemed to be a compensatory gain. Deeper connections with those who remained, new friendships with people who knew and accepted her as Serafina from the start. 1 year after the fateful office party, Wellington and Forbes held their annual quarterly gathering in the same warehouse space. Serafina arrived wearing an elegant burgundy dress, a color she'd discovered brought out the warm tones in her now naturally grown-out blonde hair, which fell in soft waves just past her shoulders. "Look at you," Cynthia said, embracing her warmly. "You're absolutely radiant." "Hard to believe it's been a year," Serafina replied, looking around the room that had witnessed her first public steps into authenticity. Dennis joined them, champagne in hand, just as he had that night. "Celebrating an anniversary of sorts?" he asked, with a knowing smile. "In a way," Serafina acknowledged. "Though I prefer to think of it as a beginning rather than an anniversary." "Well, 2 new beginnings then." He raised his glass. "And 2 fantasy football leagues with unexpectedly profound consequences." Later in the evening, as Serafina chatted with colleagues who now knew no other version of her, Rachel appeared at her side. "Remember what I said to you at last year's party?" she asked. "About how natural you seemed?" Serafina nodded. It had been one of the comments that had resonated most deeply during her awakening. "I just wanted to say that it's been beautiful watching you become even more yourself this past year," Rachel continued. "There's a lightness about you now, a comfort that's visible to everyone." "Thank you," Serafina said, touched by the observation. "It hasn't always been easy, but it's always felt right. Even on the hardest days, I've never doubted that this is who I'm meant to be." As the party continued around them, Serafina reflected on the strange twist of fate that had led her here. A lost fantasy football league. A forfeit that seemed excessive at the time. A dress in shades of peach and green that had somehow unlocked a door she hadn't even known existed. Sometimes, the most profound truths emerged from the most unexpected places. For Serafina, a light-hearted office prank had illuminated a path to authenticity that had changed everything. The journey wasn't over. Transition was an ongoing process, both physically and emotionally. But she was walking it as herself, finally free of the costume she'd worn for 32 years. 6 months later, Serafina sat across from Dr. Martinez in their now familiar therapy session.
The office was comfortable and welcoming, with soft lighting and plants thriving on every available surface.
Today marks 18 months since you began your transition journey,
Dr. Martinez noted, reviewing her notes.
How are you feeling about your progress?
Serafina considered the question thoughtfully. She was wearing a deep green blouse that complemented her eyes and slim-fitting black pants, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, an everyday, professional look that had become comfortably routine. I feel settled, she said finally. The initial euphoria has evolved into something steadier, less like I'm discovering myself and more like I'm simply living as myself. Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly.
That's a significant milestone.
Many people find that after the initial stages of transition, there's a normalization period, a time when being your authentic self becomes the baseline rather than the exception.
Exactly, Serafina agreed. There are still challenges, of course. My parents are trying, but they still occasionally use my old name or pronouns, and navigating dating as a transgender woman has been complex.
Let's talk about that,
Dr. Martinez prompted. You mentioned last session that you'd started seeing someone? A smile spread across Serafina's face. Yes, his name is Daniel. He's an architect I met through a mutual friend. He knows I'm transgender. I was upfront about that from the beginning, and he's been wonderfully understanding. How does it feel to be in a relationship as Serafina? Different. Better. She searched for the right words. When I tried dating as Miguel, there was always this disconnect. This feeling that the person I was with didn't really see me because I wasn't really showing them me. With Daniel, what you see is what you get. I'm fully present in a way I never could be before. After the session, Serafina walked through the downtown area, enjoying the crisp fall air. Her phone buzzed with a text from Cynthia. Lunch next week? Need your creative eye for a new client project. Their friendship had evolved over the months. What began as mentorship during Serafina's earliest days of transition had blossomed into a genuine bond. Cynthia had recently started her own styling consultancy and occasionally enlisted Serafina's design expertise for client presentations. Serafina texted back a quick agreement, then continued her walk. She had an hour before she needed to be back at the office, and she wanted to enjoy the beautiful day. At a crosswalk, she noticed a man staring at her from across the street. Her heart sank. This was an unfortunate aspect of being a transgender woman in public. Sometimes people noticed something about her appearance that didn't align with their expectations, and their reactions could range from confused stares to outright hostility. The light changed, and Serafina squared her shoulders, preparing to walk past the man with dignified indifference. But as they drew closer, recognition dawned.
Miguel?
The man asked uncertainly, then immediately corrected himself.
I'm sorry, that's not right, is it?
It took Serafina a moment to place him. Robert Chen, a college classmate she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Serafina, she supplied, offering a cautious smile.
It's been a long time, Robert. It has,
he agreed, looking flustered but not unkind.
You look happy.
The observation was unexpected, but accurate. I am, she confirmed. Happier than I've ever been, actually. There was an awkward pause. Then Robert asked,
Do you have time for a coffee? I'd love to catch up if you're comfortable with that.
20 minutes later, they were seated in a nearby cafe, Robert listening attentively as Serafina gave the condensed version of her journey.
So, a fantasy football forfeit changed your life,
he summarized when she finished.
That's quite a story.
Sometimes the universe works in strange ways, Serafina replied with a small laugh. What about you? What have you been up to since college? As Robert shared updates about his career in software development, his recent divorce, and his newfound passion for rock climbing, Serafina reflected on how far she'd come. 2 years ago, this kind of unexpected encounter would have filled her with dread. Now, it was merely another opportunity to be herself in the world. After coffee, they exchanged contact information with vague promises to stay in touch that both knew might or might not materialize. As Serafina headed back to the office, she felt a deep sense of contentment. Her life wasn't perfect. Whose was? But it was authentically hers in a way it had never been before. At Wellington and Forbes, she'd recently been promoted to creative director, a position that recognized both her design talents and her leadership abilities. The company had featured her story in their diversity initiatives, with her permission, and she occasionally spoke at industry events about inclusive workplace practices. Her apartment, once a sparse bachelor pad reflecting Miguel's disconnection from his living space, had been transformed into a warm home filled with colors, textures, and personal touches that reflected Serafina's true aesthetic sensibilities. The only remnant of Miguel's life was a small box in the back of her closet, containing a few photographs and mementos, not hidden away in shame, but preserved as artifacts of the journey that had led her to herself. That evening, as Serafina prepared for her date with Daniel, she caught herself smiling at her reflection, not scrutinizing or critiquing, but simply acknowledging with quiet joy the person she saw there. Her blonde hair, now grown well past her shoulders, was styled in loose waves. She wore a deep blue dress that Daniel had once mentioned brought out her eyes, with delicate gold earrings and a matching necklace. The doorbell rang, and Serafina took one last look in the mirror. The woman who gazed back at her was no longer a revelation or a surprise, but a familiar friend, the person she was always meant to be. Daniel greeted her with a warm kiss.
You look beautiful,
he said, his admiration genuine and uncomplicated. Thank you, Serafina replied, accepting the compliment with the ease of someone who has finally made peace with herself. Shall we? As they walked to the restaurant, hand in hand, Serafina reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her here. A lost bet, a floral dress in peach and green, a moment of recognition in a mirror. Sometimes life's most profound transformations began in the most unlikely places. For Serafina, what had started as an embarrassing forfeit had become the first step on a journey home to herself, a journey that continued to unfold with each passing day, not as a destination to be reached, but as a life to be lived authentically, one moment at a time. The next spring, as cherry blossoms added splashes of pink to the city landscape, Serafina received an email that made her heart skip a beat. The subject line read, Fantasy Football League Reunion Happy Hour. It had been nearly 2 years since that fateful league season, and many of the participants had moved on to different companies or departments. Serafina hadn't kept in close touch with most of them, though they'd always been friendly when their paths crossed professionally. Daniel found her staring at the screen that evening.
Bad news?
He asked, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Not bad, just unexpected. She explained about the reunion invitation. I'm not sure how I feel about it. That league changed my life in ways no one could have predicted, but it also represents a time when I wasn't fully myself. Do you think it would be healing to go? To come full circle in a way? Serafina considered this. Maybe. Or maybe it would just be nice to see some old friends and colleagues as my authentic self. The happy hour was scheduled for a Thursday evening at a popular downtown bar. Serafina chose her outfit carefully, a stylish but casual emerald green blouse, paired with dark jeans and ankle boots. Professional but relaxed, feminine but not overstated. Her blonde hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail, showcasing the delicate earrings Daniel had given her for their 6-month anniversary. Walking into the bar, Serafina spotted the group immediately. Dennis was there, along with several other former League members. For a brief moment, she felt a flutter of anxiety, then took a deep breath and approached the table.
"Serafina!"
Dennis called warmly, standing to greet her.
"So glad you could make it."
The others turned, their expressions ranging from momentary surprise to genuine welcome. It occurred to Serafina that while everyone here knew about her transition intellectually, not all of them had interacted with her regularly since she began living as herself. "It's great to see everyone," she said, taking the empty seat between Dennis and Mark from IT. "We were just reminiscing about that disastrous season," Mark explained, sliding a glass of wine toward her. "Remember when Dennis insisted that rookie quarterback was going to break all the records?" The conversation flowed easily after that, moving from fantasy football failures to office gossip to updates on everyone's current lives. Serafina found herself relaxing, laughing at old jokes and sharing stories about her recent promotion. During a lull in the conversation, Tyler, a former account manager who'd moved to a competing agency, leaned across the table.
"I hope this isn't inappropriate to bring up,"
he began, his tone careful but curious. "But I've always wondered, how did you feel about that forfeit now, looking back? Did any of us cross a line we shouldn't have?" The table fell quiet, all eyes turning to Serafina. She took a sip of her wine, considering the question. "The forfeit itself wasn't inappropriate," she said finally. "It wasn't meant to be cruel or humiliating, just playful. None of you could have known what would happen. I certainly didn't." She smiled slightly, remembering her own surprise. "In a strange way, I'm grateful for it. That night as Serafina at the office party was the first time in my life I felt truly comfortable in my own skin. It took me a while to understand why, but that experience was the catalyst I needed to recognize my truth."
"So we accidentally did you a favor,"
Mark said with a relieved grin. "The universe works in mysterious ways," Serafina replied, raising her glass. "To fantasy football disasters and unexpected journeys." Everyone clinked glasses, the mood lightening again. As the evening continued, Serafina found herself in conversation with Alicia, who had been the only other woman in the league back then. "I need to confess something," Alicia said quietly. "When Dennis first proposed that forfeit, I was uncomfortable with it. I worried it was making a joke out of femininity, you know? But watching you that night, how gracefully you handled it, how natural you seemed, I started to see it differently. And now, knowing what it meant for you," she shook her head, smiling. "Life is so unexpected sometimes." "It really is," Serafina agreed. "And for what it's worth, I appreciate your concern. The line between humor and harm can be thin sometimes, but in this case, it worked out in ways no one could have predicted." As the happy hour wound down, people began to say their goodbyes, exchanging promises to stay in touch that would likely be kept by some and forgotten by others, the natural ebb and flow of professional relationships. Dennis walked Serafina to her car.
"I've been meaning to tell you,"
he said as they strolled through the parking lot.
"How impressed I've been with your work as creative director. The Westridge campaign was brilliant."
"Thank you," Serafina replied, genuinely pleased. Their professional relationship had evolved over the years, from manager-employee to something closer to peers, especially since her promotion.
And on a personal note, Dennis continued, it's been an honor to witness your journey. You've shown remarkable courage and grace.
Touched by his sincerity, Serafina paused beside her car. That means a lot, especially coming from you. You created the conditions that made it possible for me to find myself, even if you didn't realize it at the time.
Well then, Dennis said with a smile, I suppose that makes up for all the terrible fantasy football advice I've given over the years.
They laughed together in the cool evening air, then said their goodbyes. This narrative ends precisely as it should, with a powerful resolution and the character's reflection on her life's journey. Serafina's return home after the reunion represents more than just a physical journey. It symbolizes her emotional closure and personal growth. The ordinary setting of her home, with Daniel's loving presence, contrasts with the extraordinary realization Serafina has about her own transformation. She acknowledges the contentment in her present life, as well as the extraordinary path that brought her to this peaceful point. The conversation with Daniel allows her to vocalize her newfound understanding, providing further emphasis on her progress and the satisfying conclusion of her arc. As the tale concludes with Serafina's introspection, it highlights the significance of embracing all the stages of life, the mistakes and lessons along the way, and the importance of courage and authenticity. Her gratitude for life's twists and turns is profound, illustrating that growth often stems from adversity. This conclusion highlights the power of self-discovery and the enduring strength that comes from accepting and embracing one's truth.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!